years. All my life grew up around black people, poor people, but I can't live around poor people now because they'll rob me. And why would they rob me? Because they're starving, because there's no money here. But they're telling me, now that I made a little money, I have to move here. So it's not like no one's ever trying to deal with this section. They're just moving away from it. And we're going to have more stars coming from the ghetto, but they're gonna all move this way. You know what I'm saying? So it's like all the society is doing is leeching off the ghetto. They use the ghetto for their pain, for their sorrow, for their culture, for their music, for their happiness, for their movies, to talk about boys in the hood. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be I don't want to be 50 years old at a BET We Shall Overcome Achievement Awards. You know what I'm saying? Not me. You know, I want when they see me, they know that every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther. You know, every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. You know what I'm saying? Every time I speak, I want to shiver. You know, I don't want them to be like, they know what I'm going to say because it's polite. They know what I'm going to say. And even if I get in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Ain't that what we're supposed to do? I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that's our job, is to spark somebody else watching us. We might not be the ones, but let's not be selfish, and because we're not going to change the world, let's not talk about how we should change it. I don't know how to change it, but I know if I keep talking about how dirty it is out here, somebody's going to clean it up.
This morning, ABC News obtaining exclusive video of the moment a Las Vegas SWAT team descended on the home of Duane Davis, known as Keefe D, in relation to the unsolved murder of Tupac Shakur. Around 10 p.m., several armored vehicles pulled into the suburban Henderson, Nevada neighborhood. Police order Davis out of the home. SWAT teams quickly move in. Following the search warrant, police seized electronics, phones, 4 laptops, 4 tablets, and 2 black tubs containing photographs and other items they believe could tie Davis to the murder. ABC News learning investigators also retrieved ammunition, which later testing showed the bullets did not match the shell casings from the 1996 crime scene.
No problem.
I'm speaking with John Potash, Emmy Award-winning journalist, researcher, and author of books such as Drugs as a Weapon Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists, as well as the FBI War on Tupac Shakur. Today, we're going to be talking about a little bit about the recent Las Vegas raid on the road related to the case of Tupac Shakur, some of the recent developments, as well as the evidence that is incredibly compiled by John here, showing plenty of foul play by U.S. intelligence, and I recommend both of these works. Some of my favorite books that completely changed my whole worldview of especially
Thanks a
of
lot.
some earlier musicians. But
Thanks a lot, Greg.
if you can, let's start with. Because I don't think a lot of people really know about Tupac's history with activism and the Black Panthers, especially with his relation with his mother. Can you just talk about just a little bit about the gang truce movement, his mother Afeni, his involvement in activism, and why exactly the FBI would eventually come to target and actually, I believe, admit that they're surveilling Tupac and his mother, correct?
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to make the comment that I didn't win an Emmy award, but I did win a number of awards in a number of film festivals. But thank you, though.
Oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong.
That's all right. But so Tupac's activism started at birth because his parents, his mother was Afeni Shakur, was a one-time leader of the Harlem Black Panthers. And his biological father was a New Jersey Black Panther, but he was raised most of his life or most of his childhood by meticulous Shakur, who was revered Black activist who just died recently within the last couple months. And meticulous Shakur was a acupuncturist who started acupuncture for treatment of drug addictions in the Bronx at Lincoln Detox. And he was a co-founding member of the Republic of New Africa, which was an incredible group of activists that met from around the country, grassroots activists. And so Tupac was an activist in his early years. When a reverend asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he said a revolutionary, because that was the term they used for their activism back then. White and black activists used that term revolutionary, not in the sense of shooting people to overthrow the government, but changing things, defending themselves, practicing self-defense with militarily, as Malcolm X would say, but in the sense of just changing the government for the better and changing it for a majority of the people. And so by the time he was 17 years old, he was elected the national chairman of the New African Panthers, which was a young adult group within the New African People's Organization, which was nationwide. And the New African Panthers were trying to duplicate, the Black Panthers. And so Tupac was already a national Black activist leader before he became a well-known rapper.
And so at this point in time, he's working with his father in prison, coming up with the code of thug life, and really ultimately what their objective is to bring peace among these largest warring gangs, the Bloods and Crips, and to actually turn to activism, right?
Yeah, and so that thug life movement probably got him misunderstood, but he was basically, the plan was, according to his longtime mentor, former Black Panther Watani Tayahimba, who was also his first business manager. He conveyed to me that him and Matulu had developed this plan for him to pretend to be a gangster, a thug, in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them, because Tupac was really just an intellectual prodigy. He had rewritten Shakespeare in high school, and produced it, directed, and acted in the Shakespeare play that he rewrote. And so he was never really a member of a gang, but he was trying to appeal to these gang leaders, to politicize them, to get them to call peace truces between each other and turn on to activism. And he was very successful at that, at spreading that gang peace truce movement, first throughout Los Angeles, then throughout California, and then throughout the country, even to New York City. And so, and other gangs got involved in turning on to activism and stopping the drug dealing. And so the code of thug life was to decrease the amount of damage that gangs that remained drug dealing would do to their communities. And so, it's too bad he was misunderstood that way, but nonetheless, he had a lot of success with that movement. And for that, Matulu was sent to the highest security prison in the country because of what a memo said from prisons, that he had undue influence over young Black males throughout the country. And so, and so they sent him to this underground prison in Colorado for that work. And so Tupac was doing incredible activism, and he was first targeted by the FBI, but then because of that activism that stopped the drug dealing in large parts of the country, it really decreased it in a major way. He was targeted by the CIA because the CIA were the top drug traffickers in the country.
Yeah, there's even audio of him speaking with the Latin Kings, right, where he's getting all these drug dealers off the streets and turning them into activism.
Yeah, he was actually speaking. Yeah, I haven't heard him speaking to Latin Kings in that tape recording, but I heard him speak to Tupac Shakur, who was a former head of the Crips in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah, so you might be thinking of that one, right? And so, yeah, he was talking to the former head of the Crips, one of the top Crips groups in Los Angeles, and they were working on figuring out how they were going to get more community centers up, sports leagues going, and different things like that. And so, he was definitely doing great work like that. And Tupac Shakur had majorly converted into activism in prison, and wrote a book called Monster, because his original name was Monster Cody Scott. And so he had written a really highly praised book from prison, Sonika Shakur, and then changed his name in deference to Tupac and meticulous Shakur when he was in prison.
Wow. Yeah. And so another thing that's like really interesting that you point out is that you can see a lot of the same COINTELPRO tactics between the Black Panthers and like the East Coast, West Coast rap war, right?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the same tactics were used with undercover agents to mess their heads up and turn them against each other. And excuse my scars on my face. I went to the dermatologist Friday, and she took off some, like warts and stuff on my face. Yeah. So, but yeah, so the FBI and likely, as I said, the CIA were using undercover agents inside both Tupac's life and and getting him against to think that other rappers might have been behind some of his shootings. And they were doing the same thing, of course, to the Black Panthers. And they were, it was back then, Kathleen Cleaver, the national spokesperson for the Black Panther Party, told me that they were doing similar things to them. They're in turning the Tupac's mother's Black Panthers that were in prison against Huey Newton on the West Coast. Fannie Shakur and her Black Panther 21 were in prison in New York, and on the West Coast was Huey Newton, who had been in prison for a while and then was out, but was being manipulated by a likely undercover agent. And so Elaine Brown was highly considered to be undercover agent.
Yeah, there's another one.
Other undercover agents around her had even come out with books admitting their undercover agent status. And so they were manipulating Huey Newton, and they were sending false letters back and forth between the New York Panthers and Huey Newton on the West Coast. And so when Tupac got these anonymous letters saying, "Oh, you don't know who shot you," of course it was Biggie Smalls. And Tupac, was soon to get out of prison and go to the West Coast, and was considered part of the West Coast rappers. When he was actually in jail on the East Coast, but that seemed to became the East Coast versus West Coast rap war that they called it, and it was manufactured just like the Panther War was manufactured by the FBI. Now the Panther War was found out about when activists broke into an FBI office in 1971 and stole all the documents and found all their tactics. Books were published showing the documents, and so we know about how that war was manufactured. And so I just showed the same tactics were used against Tupac in creating this fake war between him and Biggie Smalls and Puff Daddy, and I show how the undercover agents in Death Row Records. Police say there was dozens of police, police, LAPD police inside Death Row Records, supposedly moonlighting for Death Row Records. And even Russell Poole, who investigated the situation, said that his superior told them you can call them troubleshooters or covert agents, all these dozens of police officers in Death Row Records. So obviously
there's a famous napkin signing with Suge Knight. So Haitian Jack sets up a sexual liaison with Ayanna Jackson and Tupac. Mm-hmm. Tupac gets sent to prison. He's sitting on appeal, and the charge is like 1 to 4 years in prison for touching a butt.
Right.
And then Suge Knight comes in with a napkin that's basically a 3-album contract for Death Row Records.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do you believe that Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence operation from the beginning, or is there like sort of like a connection there? Where does Suge Knight fall in all of this?
Yeah,
and Haitian Jack.
I do believe Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence operation from the beginning. Yes, and some people were just fooled into believing it was something legitimate. Obviously, Dr. Dre was fooled into thinking it was more legitimate, as was Snoop Dogg and others who have serious talent. And so, with that situation with Jacques Aignant, he was found to have a rap sheet, mile-long rap sheet of major charges up and down the East Coast, all dismissed, according to Tupac's New York trial lawyer, Michael Tupac Warren, who I interviewed many times throughout my writing from spring of 1995 until, until 2000, at least 10 or so. I mean, my book came out in 2007, but I kept talking to Michael Warren, getting his consultation on, what should I do with the film, which I do with should I try to get a new publisher for my book, et cetera, et cetera. But he's been a great source of information, and he got I think it was a probation agent to get the Jacques Agnan's rap sheet, which he gave to him, to Michael Warren, and found that Jacques Agnan was, what he said was surely an undercover agent, and so he all his cases, all these major charges up and down the East Coast were dismissed for Jacques Agnan, and so he set up Tupac for that liaison with Ayanna Jackson, where he ends up getting 1.5 to 4.5 years for touching this woman's butt, who admitted she kissed his penis on a public, a dance floor in public, and they had consensual sex that night. And then a few nights later, she says that he was found guilty of touching her butt against her will after what was considered consensual sex. The jury said they had consensual sex again. And so it's just a ridiculous charge, and ridiculous amount of prison time for something so absurd. And so
it's something similar to some things you see today, actually, but
yeah, maybe. But so with Tupac, it was just absurd and just horrible what they were doing to him. And they tortured him in prison. And so, to get out of prison, he signed this, I guess, believe napkin written contract written by Dave Kenner, the mafia connected lawyer for Death Row Records. And Death Row Records was basically, they put $10 million in front money, Time Warner did, to Death Row Records to give it its start. It was filled with dozens of police officers, as I said, from pretty early on. Suge Knight's situation was he was a former college football player who couldn't get to the point of he got into the NFL very briefly when there was an NFL player strike, but he couldn't really make a career of football. So then he's very violent. He's associated with a lot of Bloods gang members, and he's doing more and more violent crime. He's convicted for more and more violent crime, and getting more and bigger sentences. When suddenly, all of a sudden, he commits his most violent crime, but he's let off completely. Doesn't, gets nothing for it. And then from then on, he keeps terrorizing different communities and gets nothing for it. Beating people up, shooting at people, likely even killing people, but involved at least in assisted, murder. And he's getting nothing for it. He's getting let off of everything. And I show that parallels what happened with the undercover agent who was arrested and said, well, we'll let you off if you become an undercover agent to set up Fred Hampton, the leader of the Chicago Black Panthers, to set up his murder. Okay, so with Suge Knight, it just shows he was basically a low-level undercover agent, low man on the totem pole. Dave Kenner was obviously somewhat higher on the totem pole, as was the head security officer for Death Row Records, Reggie Wright Jr. Because Reggie Wright Sr. was head of the gang division in Compton, California. And that was one of the first places of the Los Angeles gang peace truces between the Bloods and the Crips. And so his job was to end the Bloods versus Crips peace truce and get them warring again. Okay, so that was a U.S. intelligence tactic to kill each other, because U.S. intelligence is incredibly racist, and these people were doing these black cops were doing what they were told in that regard. And here was Reggie Wright Jr. doing that, trying to get he was setting up Bloods and Crips conflicts within death row parties, within death row studios. And there's many eyewitnesses to this. And so this is, there was even shootings and murders in public concerts, at the Snoop Dogg concert, for example. and no one was arrested. And so this is what they were trying to do. They were trying to end those, gang peace truces that Tupac was promoting, and they didn't succeed in that until Tupac's shooting. When Tupac was shot, which was, was aided by Death Row, was aided by Reggie Wright Jr., was aided by Suge Knight, setting it up, not driving him immediately to the hospital, instead of driving the other way away from the hospital. Things like that. There's so many police, errors in the way they usually do things, according to the top Las Vegas Sun crime reporter, Kathy Scott, in her book about Tupac's shooting. And so she had a 1.5-page list of police going against what they normally do in murder investigations. And so that, that's basically the way it was all set up for Tupac to be murdered, because he was taking money out of not only the CIA drug traffickers' hands, but more importantly, even the money launderers' hands. Because when all that cash gets money laundered in the stock market of banks and other corporations that are laundering it, when they have all that going into the stock market, that cash coming in can be considered. It can actually produce 20 times the amount that goes in out of what's predicted it's going to be worth in the future, that stock. And so it's a major, what could be, say, $1 million in just some dealers making that kind of money. A group of drug dealers making $1 million in 1 year can turn into actually much, much more than that. We're talking 20 million or more. And when it's a 3,000 member of the Latin Kings that turned on to activism and stopped drug dealing, as some professors documented in a book produced by Columbia University, it ends up being billions and billions of dollars that are affected by this movement.
Yeah, the stock market would literally collapse if you take out the
if you take out the drug money, right? According to Catherine Austin Fitts, who was a Wall Street insider and a former assistant secretary of housing under President Bush.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the attempts already made on Tupac's life prior to this, and how there's one in Oakland, there's another one involving 2 off-duty cops in Atlanta.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, you got to remember that the history of the FBI's counterintelligence program was murderously targeting Black activists like Fred Hampton, like Huey Newton. And so here was Tupac. He was already a national Black activist leader, as elected chairman of the New African Panthers, attempting to replicate the Black Panthers. And so then he adds wealth and fame, but really major potential wealth and fame, by getting this record deal with a brand new major label, Interscope Records. And this first song's come out, political song "Trapped" on his first album, and goes, hits MTV for worldwide release. And all of a sudden, within a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, he's stopped by Oakland police. He's beat unconscious. He's actually choked unconscious, and then his head's beaten against the curb. And I found 2 other instances where people died from those police actions. Then a second time, there was a drive-by shooting on his motorcade that was going from his film premiere, Juice, to a party after the film premiere, and they luckily missed him in that drive-by. And after that, a third instance was at the Marin Fest, when he was the invited 50th anniversary guest, for that event. Some people created a conflict with Tupac. They tried to punch him. People shot at him first. Tupac, was trying to get away from them. Tupac's stepbrother, Mopreme Shakur, merely grabbed a gun. He was playing security guard for Tupac at that event. He grabbed a gun, shot it straight in the air and had to run anyway. And the police found, now somebody was hit by a stray bullet, but they found that it wasn't from Mopreme's gun. When he shot straight in the air, it was actually, must have been from the guns of the people that were shooting at Tupac and Mopreme. And then after that, Tupac was, as I reported, was set up with that situation with Ayanna Jackson, was framed in a sexual, as thought that he might have raped Ayanna Jackson, or at least forced oral sex, forced her to give him oral sex. But the jury concluded that it was merely touching her butt against her will. And now, right after that, Tupac was at a concert, doing a concert in Atlanta. And so he had a group of cars coming from the Atlanta concert back to his hotel. And he stopped at a light, and right in front of him, some white police officers get into a fight with a black man. Not really a fight, they just start hitting a black man, really. And then they run over, according to eyewitnesses, both white and black, they run over to Tupac's car, smash the back window of his car with a gun, shoot at him. He rolls out the back, grabs a guard's gun behind him, and shoots back in self-defense. And so he was let off in court. Here was a black man shooting a white police officer in the deep south of Atlanta, and he's completely let off in court. The trial doesn't even go all the way through. Now that's really unusual, very unusual. And so part of the reason for that is I show all the evidence of is it was a botched assassination attempt, and you could say number 3 or 4 really by that point, but it was a botched assassination attempt. Part of the evidence is that these cops had used a gun that they stole from their evidence locker, and they call that a throwaway gun. Another cop testified in a different Tupac case that they call that a throwaway gun so that you can put it down if you have a wrongful murder of somebody, and no, it can't be traced back to you. And so, this is the way that went on. And there's a bunch of other evidence besides that this was an assassination attempt at Tupac. And so then you got Tupac dealing with the sexual assault case, going to jail for an inordinate amount of time. In jail, he signs this joke contract, but just because he's desperate to get out of jail. And his management, Watani Tayahimba, he was a founding national security director of the New African People's Organization, Watani Tayahimba, which was a group of former Black Panthers and former Republic of New Africa leaders who started that group. And so he said that, well, we had, I'm sorry, Tupac, but we have to distance ourselves from you because we don't know what Death Row Records is, but it's so problematic that we can't be involved with them. Now that you signed this contract. And Tupac cried on his shoulders saying, I know I'm selling my soul to the devil, but I can't take it in this prison anymore. They had him in solitary confinement for 10 out of 11 months. Oh. Yeah. And it's, they were doing all kinds of things to him, giving him rectal searches and all kinds of psychological torture in different ways that they were using something called penal coercion tactics that Amnesty International says the closest thing we have to brainwashing. Now, I show in my Drugs as Weapons book, of course, that there's things, much closer to brainwashing. There are actual brainwashing with hypnosis and drugs. Nonetheless, this is what they were doing to Tupac, and Tupac gets out of prison, finishes his record deal, which he said was supposed to be 3 CDs. And he finished that, and he started his new, record label, Euthanasia Records. Started a film company. He was producing, starring in several films already. He, was ready to produce records on his own label, and he fired Dave Kenner, the real head of Death Row Records, who actually owned the parent company to Death Row Records. And was getting away from them, but then he was set up in Las Vegas and murdered, assassinated.
I'm only 27, and I can't imagine going through all of this as like a 22, 23-year-old.
Yeah,
absolutely bonkers early life. Yeah. Now, so FBI guard. So we have a Tupac's bodyguard, Kevin Hackey.
Yeah.
Now he claims he's either an informant or he has direct connections to the FBI. He allegedly he warns Tupac not to attend the Mike Tyson event
Right.
in September of 1996,
Hmm. Yeah.
where he would eventually get shot and die. Right? Could
Right.
you elaborate more on Kevin Hackey, who
Yeah.
what his
So
connections are, where his confirmations of the shooters of the Tupac and Biggie cases?
sure. So Detective Russell Poole got himself assigned to this investigation of Biggie Smalls' murder, which happened 6 months later. And Biggie Smalls' murder was set up, I believe, to just make it look like it was an East Coast West Coast rap war that killed Tupac. Because Biggie Smalls was not an activist, even though I could argue that they might have been just killing cultural leaders in general, but I really think it was just more collateral damage. Nonetheless, they murdered Biggie Smalls, and there was probably stronger evidence of how it linked back to Death Row Records and this police, and undercover agents inside Death Row Records. But so Russell Poole, Detective Russell Poole, had been promoted many times. He was a great murder detective and a very honest murder detective in Los Angeles. And he is investigating it. And his partner, who was above him, tried to stop him from coming out with all that he had found, because as I said, his superiors said you can call these all these police agents inside Death Row Records troubleshooters or covert agents. They wouldn't allow Russell Poole to come out with this, because what he found was his fellow police officers were involved, in orchestrating or carrying out the murder of Tupac, and they murdered Biggie in order to cover up their murder of Tupac. And this came out in the Nick Broomfield film Biggie and Tupac. It also came out somewhat in the book Labyrinth. But those films only go so far. I show more of the history and why, and more of the evidence of why it was really, these police officers weren't just rogue cops. They were highly connected to U.S. intelligence, and show all the evidence of that. And so he did say, it's interesting that Randall Sullivan, a veteran journalist, did say at the end of his book that Russell Poole said all his friends said not to give all of his documents to the FBI, and Russell Poole said, but if I can't trust the FBI, who can I trust? And gave his documents to the FBI, and nothing was done with them. So that's how that book ended. But nonetheless, it's just he came out with some great evidence of all that, and of course, then he died young, sadly enough. And a co-writer of another book with Russell Poole, because Russell Poole came out with a book about more of his investigation later, and the co-writer, Michael Carlin, I believe his name is, he told me that he believes that Russell was killed at a meeting with the police officers when he was trying to give his new evidence of exactly who shot Tupac. And at that meeting, he was they killed him right there. It wasn't a
He
random
died
heart
of a
attack.
heart attack in a police station, right?
Right. It was they
Right.
called it a heart attack in the police station. And Michael Carlin says they think they used a defibrillator. It's something that shocks your heart to come back into place, but they actually used that to kill him, not to revive him.
That's
Uh,
incredible. Yeah, because
yeah,
I'm seeing like, or I've at least seen videos on YouTube of
yeah,
like, questioning the death of like Russell Poole, and you see like a lot of, so like I believe the two lead detectives on this case are Greg Kading and Russell Poole, right?
yes. Greg Kading was not a lead detective.
Okay,
Russell
okay.
Poole was assigned as a detective, assigned by LAPD as a detective on this case, really on the Biggie Smalls case in, I believe it was about 1997, right? After it happened. Because he had dealt with a case that was connected to Biggie Smalls' murder, and so he has to be assigned to it because he thought he knew some things about it, and he got that assignment. And it was Greg Kading came in. It must have been 7 to 10 years later. Okay, and Greg Kading was according to Russell Poole, he was a disgraced police officer caught lying in court, forced to retire early, and then brought in out of retirement. And Greg Kading and Russell Poole said this in a blurb about commenting on Greg Kading's book, which was a ridiculous book. Greg Kading, he says, Russell Poole said Greg Kading never interviewed me about my original investigation. and described him as a disgraced cop, caught lying in court, forced to retire early, then brought in out of retirement just to cover up what Russell Poole had found about it all. And that was the situation. And Greg Kading ends up coming out with this absurd tale that somehow Biggie brought like $1 million or some huge amount of money to Las Vegas, gave it to Keefe D to give to Orlando Anderson to shoot Tupac right after the scuffle in the MGM Grand Hotel. So basically, I'll lay it out. There was a Mike Tyson fight, and as you said, Kevin Hackey was getting paid by the FBI. He was a police officer, was getting paid by the FBI to also work as an undercover agent as one of Tupac's two top bodyguards with Frank Alexander. And Kevin Hackey appeared to turn on the FBI because he found out enough to realize that they were setting Tupac up in Las Vegas, and he warned Tupac. He told Tupac, "Don't go to Las Vegas." And when Suge Knight and Reggie Wright found out that Kevin Hackey did that, they immediately fired him. And so Tupac was really had to go to Las Vegas. I mean, he could have avoided going to Las Vegas, but he was ordered by the courts to do a benefit concert at Club 662 that night. That was supposed to be a benefit concert for his car being stopped and somebody in his car having marijuana. So it was a marijuana possession that could have landed him back in jail for violating his probation on the original sexual assault case that he was out on bail for. But the judge, in seeing his history and hearing about his history, thought he was such an amazing person that he would allow him just to do a benefit concert to get off of his probation being his bail being violated, his probation being violated, or whatever it was. And he just had to do this benefit concert, and he picked this Club 662, on the night of the Mike Tyson fight. So he was going to do that, but he was very worried about going to that Mike Tyson fight, of course, especially after Kevin Hackey warned him not to go. He didn't know what he should do, if he should do the benefit concert or if he should try to bag it. But he was wearing his bulletproof vest most of the night as he was traveling with his fiancee, Kadada Jones, who was Quincy Jones's daughter. And so he was engaged to be married into incredible wealth and influence at that time with Kadada Jones. And so, but here he is. He's in the hottest place in the country in September, in early September, Las Vegas, trying to, wearing a flak jacket, a bulletproof vest, because he's scared to death for his life. Of course, it got so hot in Vegas, he had to take it off. It could have saved his life, though. And so Suge Knight ended up he was trying to avoid weed and alcohol. I showed the evidence of that for the last, months, and he was trying to settle down and getting married to Kadada. But there was a pre-party and an after party of Mike Tyson's fight. And they set up this scuffle with Orlando Anderson, saying that he had ripped a chain off of a friend, a Death Row Records employee's, neck, and that happened to Tupac before. And so they convinced him, when he was drinking and smoking weed, to get into this scuffle with Orlando Anderson. It was very brief. Orlando Anderson afterwards apparently said, according to eyewitnesses, that he's fine, no big deal. And that was it. That was the extent of what happened there. Now, Keefe D comes back and says, 25 years later in an interview, that, his nephew, Orlando Anderson, actually hurt his arm, and he had to go to the hospital emergency room, and his arm was in a sling. But Keefe D also, according to Greg Kading, said that Orlando Anderson shot Tupac and killed Tupac, and that Keefe D was driving the car when this all happened. So really, in 2 hours, he goes to the ER, gets in a sling, comes back, and his right arm's in a sling, Keefe D says, and then shoots Tupac. And most people are right-handed. How's he accomplish that? What's called a professional hit, and how's he locate Tupac so quickly? And how's he get through? Most people, when they go through a hospital ER, especially during a Mike Tyson fight when Las Vegas is incredibly crowded, how's he go through an ER so fast? It takes usually you're in the ER for hours waiting to be seen, and it's all just a ridiculous story basically. And Greg King's other parts of the story is Biggie giving Keefe D $1 million for this to happen, and who doesn't recognize Biggie Smalls in Las Vegas? Biggie Smalls is this 350-pound top selling rapper. Who doesn't recognize that he's in Las Vegas? He was in New Jersey. They've got his family had tape recordings of him recording in a New Jersey recording studio in Jersey at the time of Tupac's murder. That whole day and night and the whole weekend or whatever it was. So it's all just Great King's story is completely absurd. The whole story is absurd. So this new investigation is just part of the absurdity. It's part of the cover up.
And that's ultimately why I wanted to bring you on today, because to really clear the air here. What this recent Las Vegas police raid is on Keefe D's home, or Duane Kieth Richards.
Yeah, it's actually Duane Kieth.
So this is based off of a 2011 confession on which he's doing a plea bargain for a drug charge, correct?
Right, a major drug charge. He could have been in jail for dozens of years, in prison for dozens of years, right? But they let him off of everything. He was caught red-handed with drug trafficking, and they let him off of everything in order just to say what he said. And and lawyers know that it's a joke, to get someone to say what they're going to say, letting him off of dozens of years in prison. Of course, they'll say whatever you want.
Yeah, under those conditions, I mean, even Tupac admits that prison really breaks your spirit. And Kevin Hackey, he would eventually we know that FBI agents were present during both the Tupac murders and the Biggie Smalls murders.
No, Kevin Hackey wasn't present for either of those murders.
No. He said that FBI agents were present.
Yeah, Kevin Hackey said that. Kathy Scott said that. Kathy Scott was award-winning Las Vegas crime reporter for the Las Vegas Sun. A number of people, prominent people, have said that. And so at Biggie's murder, the undercover New York police intelligence officer was named Detective Oldham, and so he gave his card to Randall Sullivan got his card, and so he was found by Nick Broomfield to also be monitoring Puffy's court case, and he called him while he said he's in court monitoring P. Diddy's court case. So he's they're targeting rap in general basically in that way, because Puffy had then started becoming activist and getting involved in the Hip Hop Summit Action Network, which was attempting to, stop any kind of conflicts between rappers and turn on to activism in a big way.
I mean, Congress even formed a literal committee to stop the dangers of radical
rap. Right. In 1993, they formed a committee to stop the dangers of rap and activism. Yeah, and so that's what Nick Broomfield talked about, and in his film Biggie and Tupac, and so basically Detective Oldham, New York Police Detective Oldham, was also a member of the FBI, and this is the way it works. You can be both in police intelligence and the FBI at the same time. They overlap. That's the way it worked with the counterintelligence program, the FBI's counterintelligence program, and even with the attack on the Black Panthers in the 60s, a CIA agent became head of New York's Bureau of Special Services, Police Intelligence, that was doing COINTELPRO work, the FBI's counterintelligence program work. But here's a CIA agent now doing this kind of work in a local way for the local police department in New York City. And so they all overlap that way.
So what do you think that we can expect from this recent Las Vegas raid? I mean, so I'm assuming that their precedent is off of this one confession, and that they're seizing laptops and hard drives, which I'm not sure what can you find on a hard drive or a laptop from 1996 that's connected to a murder from 19. I
Well,
don't understand. I don't fully understand. And
yeah.
like so like I don't want to put you on the spot, but you did say it before. You believe that this is an active FBI cover up?
Yeah. Yeah, it's U.S. intelligence cover up, and so they're gonna, they could try to manufacture more of the cover up and manufacture a story that makes it look like Greg Kading's story is somehow correct. When if you saw A&E's documentary Who Killed Tupac, I was in that. Preem Shakur was a co-producer. That's Tupac's stepbrother. Was a co-producer in that, and Benjamin Crump, the activist lawyer, basically shows up Greg Kading, asks him directly in the film, so you let off, Keefe D, major drug charges, let him off completely in order for him to say what he said. And him and a veteran journalist with him both agree that that's just bogus, a bogus statement. You can get anyone to say anything when you let them off of major charges like that. So so I think it's going to be a sophisticated manufactured story about Keefe D, Duane Keefe D Davis and Orlando Anderson to make it look like they solved Tupac's murder, when actually it was just more of the cover up. Sorry about the phone.
No worries. Yeah,
Yes.
there's all these interconnecting factors involved.
Yeah.
Yet, I mean, we kind of see this with like kind of like an Epstein sort of like situation where like they take down one person and the whole client list is gone. They're taking down one. I believe Keefe D's probably a fall guy. They need to have a fall guy in order to wrap this all up, make it look clean, make sure there's no federal agents in there.
Right.
Meanwhile, we have all of your evidence and all of this, incredible research you've compiled together. That even in your book, drugs as a weapon against us. The CIA has been active against musicians like Kurt Cobain and others for years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, they were very active. They were active against musicians since Elvis Presley, believe it or not, because Elvis Presley was arguably one of the biggest integrationists in the country. He loved black music. He always said, "I'm not the king of rock and roll." People like Bo Diddley and these other great black rock R&B artists are the kings of rock and roll. And he would have integrated concerts, and he always went to he went to black concerts. He loved the black R&B, and that's why he imitated them. So there was an FBI file on Elvis, and I argue they infiltrated him with Colonel Tom Parker, and manipulated him at 21 years old, got him addicted to these uppers and downers, got him giving out uppers and downers to other musicians to control them, and Johnny Cash and others. And so they basically tried to control all these musicians from day one, or as early as they could. They did similar stuff. They to John Lennon and to Mick Jagger and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and then they proceeded to manipulate Kurt Cobain and others in that music genre, and try to manipulate them to promote heroin inadvertently, and did them in when they sobered up. And with Tupac, I argue they were trying to manipulate him to partly to promote weed, but he wouldn't do any other drugs. And then when he started sobering up, they didn't like that. But the big issue was him, again, convincing these gangs that were dealing drugs to stop dealing drugs and turn on to activism, and to stop fighting each other, but to fight against racism. And that was the biggest concern of theirs by far, because again, it affected billions and billions of dollars of the bank's money, these corporations that also launder money, the CIA drug trafficking money, etc. Yeah.
Incredible. That just goes to show, like, and once you see all this, I do recommend Who Killed Tupac, by the way, too, as well.
Mm-hmm.
A great series. Once you read all of this research, and then you begin to ask yourself questions like, how much of the music today am I listening to is like COINTELPRO tactics? Like, how many of like these like giant media figures like Andrew Tate, who admits that his dad is CIA. How many of these people are placed here purposely?
Yeah.
Or like how many of these like lives are like completely manufactured for the show? You know?
Yeah, it's hard to know. It really is. It's you just have to sift through them all and hope that, you know, some are legitimate and some are, you know, sound authentic and are saying stuff that's positive. But so much is, you know, so many of them are saying negative stuff too. With rap, it's sad what they've done with rap. I mean, Chuck D of Public Enemy always said they always promote the negative rappers and demote and don't promote the positive rappers. They were doing that early on with his band, you know, Public Enemy. And so that's just
weren't they trying to go after NWA too?
Yeah, they were basically Suge Knight helped dismantle NWA. Now there was conflicts within NWA already that, you know, led Ice Cube out of NWA, but they basically stole DMX. Suge Knight and Dave Kenner stole DMX from NWA, and then of course they took Dr. Dre out of NWA. And you know, there's a lot of stories around that about how that was done. But it's yeah, they definitely targeted them. The FBI warned them, sent them a warning letter that you know, they're being watched because of their activist songs like, you know, F the police. I don't know if, you know, you can't cuss on here or not, but fuck the police, and stuff like that. Yeah, and so, you know, they had some, you know, Ice Cube and all had some, and Dre and Eazy had some really interesting lyrics in their first great album, Straight Outta Compton. And the FBI was watching them immediately. Sent them a warning letter in 1988. Tried to get some of their concerts canceled, and then of course did the same thing against Rage Against the Machine, who happened to be touring with I think it was DMX, rapper DMX at the time. But they were sent. They tried to get Rage Against the Machine's concert canceled. And Zach De La Roca, I ran into him at a cafe, the New York and Poets Cafe in New York, when I was reading a poem about that was like, you know, a poem based on FBI war on Tupac Shakur and black leaders. But this is back in like 1999, before I even came as close to coming out with the book. I just come out with an article back then, and so Zach said that, you know, they were trying to get all their concerts canceled, and they fought with lawyers and you know, won in court to not get their concerts canceled. And they're using the same excuse that they tried to get Tupac's concerts canceled, which was saying the concerts were a riot risk, you know, and trying to get all the security guard pulled from the concert, all the police security, you know, pulled from the concert. So yeah, but so yeah, they were targeting a lot of different musicians and bands that way.
This just goes to show what happens when you become an actual threat to power, an actual threat to establishment figures. They'll manipulate you. They'll literally kill you if they have to. There's some new ways nowadays with, like, you know, the current way, the internet culture and the way that careers kind of work nowadays. But honestly, incredible. I recommend, you know, everyone here to check out John Potash's work. I don't want to keep you here for too long. I know you got to get going. So
yeah, thanks.
I appreciate you coming on and clearing this up.
Sure.
But now we know that whatever smelly stuff is going on over here, it's total BS, according to John Potash, right?
Okay. Thanks a lot for having me on there, Greg. It's good talking to you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it so much.
Sure thing. Yeah. If anything comes up again, I'll call you. I'll try to contact you when my next film comes out. Should be out within 6 to 8 months, but it's got more on this issue we're talking about. Okay. I'll tell you about it then.
Awesome.
Right.
Okay.
Great.
Cool.
All right, great. Take care now.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Indie News Network, collaborative family of independent content creators. Co-hosted normally by me, Indy. I'm founder and editor of Indie Left News and Indie Media Today. I got Reef Breland sitting next to me.
Academy News.
Is Andrew Rivera. I'm the Handsome Cynic.
It's Politics and Survival.
My name is Jesse Jett.
It's American Tradition.
What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden.
I mean, I mostly make art for INN.
Big Man Crab Joe. Keep up those great videos.
Hey guys, it's Yeti coming at you.
Hello, my name is Lucy from Blue Moon Red Duane.
This is Chris Legion.
Keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Who are these people?